Good afternoon, everyone.
好，各位午安。
I am so happy to be with you today.
今日同大家喺埋一齊，我好開心。
And I'm very thankful for the invitation to be with you.
我好多謝大家對我嘅邀請，以致我喺大家當中。
The Raybach Institute and Bethel University for the wonderful hospitality and care that you have given me.
咁好多謝伯特利神學院呢一個嘅百期城市轉化中心邀請我，以致我可以同大家分享。
My name is Sami Awad.
咁頭先大家都知道啦，我嘅名就叫 Sami Awad。
And I bring you greetings from your Christian brothers and sisters in Bethlehem.
咁我就願意將巴利行弟兄姊妹嘅平安帶俾大家。
Usually, I begin my presentation by saying I am a Palestinian Christian.
我通常開始嘅時候喺好多聚會裏面開始介話，我係巴勒斯坦嘅基督徒。
And when I say I'm a Palestinian Christian in many churches, especially in America,
當我咁樣介紹嘅時候，喺北美好多教會。
one of the first questions that I get is, when did you convert? When
第
did
一
you
個
become
嘅
a
問題，
Christian?
佢哋會問啊，你幾時嚟到係歸信耶穌基督？
The assumption they have is that because I'm a Palestinian, that means I'm an Arab, and if you are an Arab, you're a Muslim. That means I was a Muslim and I became a Christian.
於是好多時候佢哋中間誤解就話，你作為一個嘅巴勒斯坦人，你一定係一個穆斯林，你一定係回教徒，所以你幾時你係變成咗一個基督徒？
And of course, because they are white American churches, they think that we converted from white American missionaries.
咁所以佢哋以為通常係白人嘅教會，你以為嗰啲白人嘅宣教士去到巴勒斯坦，就令到呢啲穆斯林咧嚟到歸主啦。
What we say is, yes, my family probably did convert and become a Christian family, but it wasn't because of white Americans.
咁當然我家族係成為基督徒，就唔係因為嗰啲白人嘅宣教士嘅緣故。
I say our family maybe became Christian 2,000 years ago.
咁我哋嘅家族成為基督徒，可能係2000年前就已經開始咗啦。
From the time of Jesus.
即係由耶穌係響伯利恆嗰個城市開始。
If you read in Acts 2, when the disciples were filled with the Spirit and began to speak in tongues, one of the languages they spoke is Arabic.
咁你如果睇翻《使徒行傳》第2章裏邊就講，當聖靈充滿佢哋嘅時候，佢哋唔同嘅人去講起唔同地方嘅方言，咁其中一個方言一定就係阿拉伯文。
So we have been in the land since the beginning.
所以我哋就一直喺呢個地土裏邊咧，就係由嗰陣時候開始。
Now, I don't have too much time to give you my 2,000-year history.
咁當然我唔會有太多時間講晒呢2000年嘅歷史。
So I'm going to jump to the modern times.
咁所以好快我就跳到去而家呢一個年代。
If you ask Palestinians or Israelis to begin to say their story, we have the same opening line.
咁如果你係請一個巴勒斯坦人去開始講述佢故事嘅時候，佢開始嘅時候都會咁樣講。
And the opening line is in 1948.
咁一定係由1948年開始。
And then we have two different stories.
咁所以無論一個2000年又好，巴勒斯坦又好，大家都係由1948年開始。不過跟住咧，大家就分道揚鑣啦。
If you remember in history, in 1948, there was a war in the Holy Land.
咁大家都會知道1948年有戰爭係發生喺以色列呢個地土上邊。
That led to the establishment of the state of Israel.
於是就使到以色列嚟到立國。
Which was a very big celebration for the Jewish people around the world.
於是就帶嚟咗全世界各地嘅猶太人都為到呢件事情好興奮。
As the Jewish people and the world was celebrating the establishment of the Jewish state.
於是猶太人同埋世界各地人都嚟到慶祝以色列立國。
The Palestinian community, which I am part of, we were experiencing what we call the catastrophe.
咁而對於喺呢個巴勒斯坦地土裏邊嘅巴勒斯坦人嚟講，佢哋經歷嘅同一樣事情嚟講咧，卻係災難。
And my family, from my father's side, was one that really experienced this catastrophe like many Palestinian families.
而我嘅家族入邊，我父親咧就正如其他巴勒斯坦人一樣咧，就係經歷嗰個痛苦嘅嗰個嘅歷史。
My father and his family lived in Jerusalem.
我嘅父親同埋佢家族係住喺耶路撒冷。
They lived in a neighborhood outside the old city.
佢哋就住喺呢個舊城嘅外邊。
One of the things that many people seem to forget
有一件事好多人都會忘記嘅。
is that this neighborhood, like many neighborhoods in the land, had Jewish, Christian, and Muslim families live together as good neighbors.
但佢好多時候大家忘記咧，原來喺呢啲嘅舊城嘅一啲社區裏邊，係有一啲以色列嘅基督徒同埋一啲穆斯林係彼此作為鄰舍，大家係相安無事嘅。
Sometimes when we talk about the conflict in the Holy Land, some people say, oh, this is a historic religious conflict. It's been going on for hundreds and thousands of years and cannot be resolved.
好多時候當講到以巴嘅衝突嘅時候，我哋會一個印象就話呢個以巴衝突係一個宗教嘅問題，一個歷史嘅問題，由來已經甚遠啦。
There are even some people that actually say conflict is God's will. What is happening, this is providence. This is what God wants. People killing each other, it's all for God's will for this land.
或者有啲人甚至乎係誤解呢個就係上帝嘅旨意，呢個係上主嘅安排，已經係進行咗好耐嘅啦。
The reality that we had, like many people had, that this is not true.
但現實裏邊我哋所經驗嘅，其實呢啲嘅講法咧係唔真實嘅。
As I said, the neighborhood my father grew up in, they loved each other.
喺我父親嗰陣時候成長嘅社區嘅背景，呢啲唔同信仰嘅人士一齊生活咧係冇問題嘅。
My father was actually telling me 2 weeks ago something I did not know.
我父親啱啱2禮拜以前嘅時候先話俾我聽一啲嘅事，我自己唔知道嘅。
When he was a child, him and the Christian boys and the Muslim boys, they used to turn on and off the light and the oven for the Jewish families during Shabbat.
就其實佢當時穆斯林嘅一啲細蚊仔同一啲基督徒嘅細蚊仔，佢細個時候玩就話咧，就喺佢哋猶太人安息日嘅時候咧，又開燈又熄燈咁樣嚟到作動佢哋。
So one thing very
sorry， OK 係即係多謝，即係幫嗰啲猶太咧，佢哋喺安息日咧係唔可以開燈同埋熄燈，就將專門幫佢做呢樣嘢。
You know, in Shabbat, the very religious Jewish families, they don't do anything.
Yeah.
They eat, but they don't do anything else. Yeah. So for me, it's very important to understand this.
嗱，所以呢個就係一個好重要嘅，我哋人哋去了解。
It is not about people having rights and some people not having rights.
就唔係話一啲人佢有佢嘅權益，另外一啲人就冇咗佢嘅權益。
Because we all live in a situation where everybody understood that everybody have rights. The Jewish people, the Muslim people, the Christian people. It is not about denying anybody the right to be in this land.
嗱，其實我要講嘅就係每一個人都有佢嘅嗰個嘅權利，以至無論佢係一個猶太人又好，一個巴勒斯坦人又好，佢作為一個人，佢都享有呢啲大家有嘅嗰種嘅權利。
So the question we're trying to answer is what happened that shifted a reality where people respected each other to a reality where people fight and hate each other.
咁我哋要問啦，點解原來大家係可以彼此尊重嘅嗰種嘅態度，發展到而家，居然係彼此之間咧係互相仇視對方。
And very sadly, I say this as a Christian, we began to justify the hatred and the violence through our theology and our religion.
而我作為基督徒，我覺得係好可悲嘅就係有啲時候，甚至乎我哋嘗試嚟到去合理化，甚至乎我哋嚟到係將我哋嘅一啲嘅立場咧係加咗一啲嘅神學啊，或者加咗一啲嘅嘢喺裏邊。
When the war happened in 1948, my grandfather was killed in the war.
喺1948年佢發生呢個戰爭嘅時候，我嘅祖父喺個戰爭裏邊咧就被殺害。
He wasn't involved in the war, he was a civilian.
其實佢唔係參與嗰個戰爭，佢只係一個平民。
He was just trying to protect his family and he was shot by a sniper.
咁佢只係嘗試去保護佢家庭，就當時就被槍殺。
When the Jewish army took over the neighborhood,
當呢個猶太人軍隊嚟到佔據咗呢整個嘅社區
they demanded that all the non-Jewish families leave their homes.
佢哋就要求所有非猶太人嘅家庭係離開呢個嘅社區。
So the Christians and the Muslims, they left and we became what's known as Palestinian refugees.
於是基督徒又好，穆斯林又好，佢要離開呢個社區，於是就成為咗今日所講嘅難民。
The Jewish families that were living there, they tried to beg their own soldiers to keep the families. They were their friends. We don't want them to leave.
當時猶太人嘅家庭都嚟到係請求嗰啲軍隊就話，其實呢啲都係我鄰舍嚟㗎，唔好佢哋嚟到讓佢哋逼遷咧離開呢個嘅社區。
But they couldn't do anything about it.
但佢哋唔能夠做到任何嘅事情。
75% of the Palestinian population became refugees.
於是我睇到75% 嘅人口就成為咗巴勒斯坦嘅難民。
Close to over 700,000 people left their homes.
咁就差唔多有幾百萬嘅人嚟到離開咗佢哋嘅家園。
This was the catastrophe.
呢個就當時我哋睇到嘅嗰個嘅災難。
My grandmother and 7 children ended up in Bethlehem.
於是我嘅祖母帶住佢哋啲兒孫就去咗定居喺伯利恆呢個城市裏邊。
They lost everything.
當時佢哋已經係喪失咗佢哋好多嘅嘢。
And the children ended up growing in very, very poor orphanage homes.
咁而我哋當時喺嗰個生活裏邊咧，都係一個好艱難嘅情況，甚至係一個即係孤兒嘅環境裏邊成長。
But one thing my grandmother taught her children from the very first day that they experienced this catastrophe.
當我嘅祖母嚟到教導佢嘅仔女喺呢個災難之後點樣嚟到應對咧
Was that our faith is a faith that says we will not take revenge and retaliation to those who did this to us.
就係話我哋嘅信仰教導我哋就唔係嚟到去報復，唔係嚟到去惡待翻嗰啲對我哋唔好嘅人。
That while we might have the excuse to use violence because of what happened to us, we will never use violence as a family.
我哋唔應該喺我哋家族裏邊去用翻暴力去作為一個藉口嚟去對付嗰啲嘅人。
At the same time, she also taught her children and us as grandchildren that we will also not remain silent in the face of injustice.
咁同樣，我嘅祖母教導我哋喺面對一啲嘅不公義嘅事情嘅時候，我哋唔應該嚟到閉口不言。
That our faith calls us to be peacemakers, to seek justice, and to bring hope to the suffering communities.
我哋嘅信仰就使到我哋能夠做一個和睦之子，同樣係喺受苦人民當中為佢哋帶嚟咗盼望。
One of the messages that she kept even before she passed away, she would tell us that she doesn't even want us to find out who was the person that killed her husband.
甚至乎佢都唔想佢嘅子孫嚟到去揾得到究竟係邊一個嚟殺死佢哋嘅祖父。
And we need to forgive them and move on with our life.
咁我哋係需要嚟到去寬恕佢，我哋繼續有我哋嘅生活。
Jumping to my story.
咁跟住就跳到嚟我個人嘅故事。
I grew up in Bethlehem.
我就係喺呢個伯利恆城裏成長。
I grew up living under what we call Israeli military occupation.
而我哋就係喺以色列軍隊嘅呢一個嘅所謂佔據底下嚟到過生活。
So as you know, Israel was established in 1948.
我哋頭先講咗1948年以色列正式立國。
And it was established on what's about 80% of the Holy Land.
咁於是80%嘅地土都係俾佢哋佔領咗。
In 1967, there was another war.
於是1967年嘅時候，另外一場戰爭係發生咗。
Israel won the war.
以色列贏咗場戰爭。
But they did not do like 48. After winning the war, they said, okay, now all of it is the state of Israel.
咁佢哋就唔係好似上一次戰爭咁樣就呢一全部咧都係屬於以色列人。
They could have easily done this. They won the war. They could have said, we won the war, all of it now, all of the Holy Land is now the state of Israel. But they did not do that.
嗱，當然佢可以話我贏咗戰爭，所有地土應該都係屬於我哋，佢哋可以咁樣做。
In the land that they won after 1967, they created military rule.
咁而係喺1967年嗰一次，佢哋贏咗戰爭之後，佢哋就開始嚟去制定一啲嘅法律，嚟係讓佢哋可以嚟去管治嗰啲嘅地區。
Our life was controlled by the Israeli military.
咁於是我哋就由呢個好似一個所謂軍人嚟到係接管嘅呢一種嘅狀況裏邊嚟過我哋嘅生活。
And military commands and regulations regulated everything we did in our life.
於是呢一個嘅所謂軍人管治就嚟到係去差唔多成為咗我哋生活嘅大部分，嚟到係受佢嚟到係管治啦。
We could not elect our leaders. We could not develop our culture. We could not even use the word Palestinian to describe ourselves. It was very, very strict control.
我哋唔可以選舉我哋嘅領袖，我哋係唔可以做好多嘅嘢，以是我哋甚至乎都唔可以話巴勒斯坦呢一個嘅名字。
And as a child that was living in this situation,
咁我就喺一個咁嘅環境裏邊嚟到係成長。
I was beginning to experience a lot of hatred to Israelis because of this.
咁因為咁嘅緣故，所以當我成長嘅時候喺我裏邊就對以色列人有好多嘅呢啲嘅憎恨。
Again, it wasn't about do they have the right or they don't have the right. Is it theological or not? It is just how I was treated by them.
嗱，所以呢個問題就唔係在於嗰個神學，或者係咪佢哋有呢個權利，或者我哋有呢個權利，乃係喺我自己成長嘅時候，喺我裏邊所經驗呢種好真實嘅嗰種嘅感受。
And me, my family, my group, my identity group, the non-Jews, the Palestinians, were treated in a very, very bad way by them.
於是我哋會喺我嘅家族裏邊，或者好多非以色列嘅家庭，無論係基督徒又好、穆斯林又好，佢哋都係同樣係去面對或者感受住呢一種，即係受住一種好似非人嘅嗰種嘅對待。
At the same time that I am beginning to grow in hatred towards them, I have the other side of the story that says seek peace with them from my family.
咁當我一方面喺我成長裏邊有呢啲嘅唔好嘅感受嘅時候，但另一方面有聲音就係話你係需要尋求和睦同呢啲嘅人。
And I remember when I was 9-year-old, I was arguing with my father.
當我9歲嘅時候，我記得我仲同我嘅父親喺呢方面咧係有爭論。
How dare you ask me to make peace with them and look what they just did to you?
咁你做咩要求我係同呢啲咁嘅人咧嚟到去和好？即係我哋點可以做呢啲咁嘅行動咧
I would see them yell at my father, for example. The soldiers who were just a few years older than me, 18, 19 years old, yell at my father, insult him, make him stand alone outside, and he couldn't do anything and I couldn't do anything, and he's still telling me, make peace with them.
我就即係喺當時我唔可以理解，即係我嘅爸爸俾嗰啲即係好後生嘅嗰啲嘅以色列軍隊，即係叫佢做呢樣做嗰樣，咁樣侮辱佢，咁樣嚟到羞辱佢，但係我父親仍然叫我你要努力同呢啲人嚟到尋求我。
The bridge that connects these two narratives happened when I was 12 years old.
當喺12歲嘅時候，就我開始稍為明白。
An uncle of mine who was living in the U.S. came back to Palestine, to Jerusalem.
我有一個叔父，佢一段時間生活喺西方，佢就翻嚟呢一個嘅耶路撒冷呢個地方裏邊。
And he started a center to teach non-violence to the Palestinians.
佢就嚟到成立呢個中心，就開始教導巴勒斯坦人非暴力嘅嗰種嘅抗爭。
This is not to say that before that Palestinians were violent people.
嗱，當然咁樣講咧，又唔係話以前啲巴勒斯坦人咧就好暴力。
But he came very similar to what Gandhi did in India or Martin Luther King in the civil rights movement. How do we organize more non-violent protests to end this occupation, to end our suffering?
佢嘅叔父所做嘅就類似甘地喺印度裏邊，或者馬丁路德金喺美國平權運動裏邊所做嘅，就係教導佢哋係一個嘅，即係俾軍人佔據嘅下邊點樣用非暴力嘅方式嚟到生活。
And from a very young age, I started participating in many of the activities, protests, demonstrations that he was doing.
於是喺我年青嘅時候，我就參與響其中，就嚟做一啲嘅所謂遊行啊、示威啊等等，而係用一個非暴力嘅方式。
Two things happened in working with my uncle that really changed my life.
有兩樣嘢就發生咗啦，就嚟到影響咗、改變咗我嘅嗰個嘅生活。
The first thing was, for the first time, I met Israelis who were not bad soldiers.
咁我係認識一啲以色列人，而呢啲以色列人咧，其實佢哋都係一啲好人嚟嘅，唔係嗰啲好壞嘅嗰啲嘅士兵。
Israeli peace activists, Israelis who understood that something is wrong and that their government and their military was doing something wrong and they wanted this to stop.
我認識呢啲都係愛好和平嘅以色列人，佢知道佢哋嘅軍隊，知道佢政府有啲嘢係做錯咗，而佢都係嘗試嚟到係要嚟到尋求同埋建立呢一個嘅和平。
Just like many people around the world, when they think Palestinian, they think bad people, terrorists.
就正如好多外界人一諗起巴勒斯坦人就會話恐怖分子，呢班人咧就一定咧唔係愛好和平㗎啦。
And then you meet one person that breaks that whole theory.
當你見到一個人嘅時候，你就開始你原來嘅嗰個成見就開始粉碎啦。
I met many Israelis that broke my stereotype as a Palestinian of Israeli society.
於是當我接觸呢啲唔同嘅以色列人嘅時候，於是就改變咗我原先對以色列人嗰種先入為主嘅成見。
But having a people that is interested in peace and reconciliation doesn't always mean that the leadership is interested.
當然一啲嘅人佢哋有興趣關注呢個和平嘅課題，唔表示上層嘅領導佢哋一定係同樣嘅，好似啲人咁樣咧，係對和平咧係有同樣嘅關注。
In 1988, my uncle was arrested by the Israeli government.
喺1988年嘅時候，我嘅叔父就俾以色列軍隊咧嚟到拘捕。
He was put on trial. It was a very big trial.
於是以色列政府咧就嚟到去審訊同埋逮捕我嘅叔父。
Lots of media attention, lots of diplomatic attention to him.
於是就成為咗一個媒體嘅事件，又成為一個外交嘅事件。
Because he was a non-violent peace activist in trial in Israel.
因為佢係一個非暴力喺以色列裏邊咧，係嚟到去搞呢啲活動嘅一個嘅人。
And the Israeli court, the high court, they decided to deport my uncle, to kick him out from the land.
咁以色列最高法院最後就裁決就係將我嘅叔父就將佢趕出呢個以色列呢個地方裏邊。
Specifically because of his work in non-violence.
就因為佢所做嘅呢啲非暴力嘅呢啲嘅抗爭嘅運動。
And many people they were surprised by this. A peace activist, a non-violent activist is seen as a threat.
咁於是好多人就會奇怪啦，一個和平分子，一個和平運動嘅活躍分子，居然而家係成為咗構成以色列嘅嗰個嘅威脅。
So I began to ask the same question, and I decided I want to commit my life to understanding what is so powerful about non-violence.
咁於是我就都同樣對呢樣嘢咁樣奇怪就點解非暴力係可以有一個咁巨大嘅影響
？So I went to the U.S. to study.
於是我在美國嚟到係去繼續嚟喺呢方面嚟進修。
I did a degree in political science and a master degree in peace studies.
咁於是我就嚟到研究呢個政治哲學，又同時嚟到係去修讀一啲嘅科目係有同呢個嘅和平有關嘅。
And I came back to the Holy Land in 1996.
咁於是96年嘅時候，我就翻去呢一個嘅聖地。
I came back at that time not interested in non-violence.
咁當我翻嚟嘅時候，我基本上對於非暴力嘅都唔係太大興趣。
Because we had a peace process.
因為當時兩邊都係有一個嘅所謂和平談判進行當中。
Maybe you remember in the media they were talking about the Oslo peace process.
大家都會記得嗰時有所謂奧斯陸協議，就係講緊以巴兩方面嘅嗰個談判。
Yasser Arafat and Rabin, they were shaking hands.
咁你就睇到有貝金同埋阿拉法兩個人係彼此握手。
Everybody was excited. Everybody was happy.
當時大家都好開心。
I came back to see what can I do to help make this peace more possible.
咁於是我翻到去以色列嘅時候，翻到去巴勒斯坦嘅時候，有啲咩可以令到呢樣嘢係做得更加好咧
？And because everybody knew the outcome of the peace process.
於是我哋睇到一個，因為呢一個協議就帶嚟咗一個和平嘅新嘅一個契機。
So the peace process wasn't about let us sit together and to see what is a solution to reach. It was sitting together, knowing what the solution is. How are we going to reach that?
咁而嗰個協議有啲類似就係我哋已經有一個嘅答案啦，而家我哋坐低落嚟就睇我哋點樣去達成，我哋要朝向嘅個最終嘅個目標大家已經有個共識啦。
And the solution was what is called two states.
當時所講喺呢個協議裏邊咧，就係話有兩個嘅國家嚟到喺當中嚟到共存嘅。
One state for Israel to be established, 80% of the territory.
於是一個就係以色列國，佢係佔有80%嘅地土。
One state for Palestine.
於是另一個就係巴勒斯坦國。
Around 20% of the territory.
大概係佔有2成嘅地土。
Very simple.
咁就好簡單。
The peace process was just to get there.
咁而嗰個嘅所謂和平嘅嗰個進梯嗰個進程就話點樣係去達成呢個協議裏面呢一個嘅共識。
The sad reality, we did not get there.
咁啊，當然嗰個嘅事實嘅另一邊係比較可惜嘅就係我哋係冇確實係達到呢一個原先嘅嗰個嘅協議。
And if I want to blame anybody why we did not get there, I blame the leadership on both sides.
咁如果話點解明明雙方已經達成協議，後來喺個歷史裏邊做唔到呢？我只係可以怪嘅就係怪雙方嘅領導層。
Leaders on both sides failed us as the communities living in the Holy Land.
咁而我話兩方面嘅領袖都令到雙方嘅人民係好失望，達唔到原來大家已經傾妥咗嘅嗰個嘅共識嘅方案。
So in 1998, before the peace process collapsed, a group of us came and started this organization called Holy Land Trust.
咁所以喺嗰陣時候，我哋就成立咗一個叫做聖地嘅一個信託嘅一個基金會。
Because we were not thinking the peace process was going to collapse that fast, our first project was nothing about the political situation.
嗱，所以我哋開始成立呢個聖地嘅信託基金嘅時候，因為當時我哋好樂觀有呢一個協議嘛，所以其實我哋做嘅嘢咧係唔牽涉到政治嘅嗰個嘅層面。
Our first project was actually a project to celebrate the birth of the Messiah, of Christ.
咁其實我第一個嘅我要做嘅一個嘅事工就係我哋去慶祝有關彌賽亞嘅嗰個嘅降生。
If you remember, the year 2000 was coming.
因為當時就係迎接呢個2000年嘅時候。
Happy birthday 2000.
咁嘅所謂就係2000年，即係一個所謂生日快樂。
How many times can we celebrate the millennium birth?
即係呢個係迎接千禧年喎，呢個係一件大事嚟㗎。
And especially Bethlehem, you know, where
特別係當時我係喺伯利恆呢個城市裏邊，你諗下，即係迎接千禧年係一件好興奮嘅事情。
So the project that we prayed about and we came up with was a project to do a reenactment of the journey of the wise men, the journey of the Magi.
咁所以當時我哋就嘗試就係重演翻嗰啲東方嘅智者，佢哋嚟到以色列呢個地方裏邊咧，去尋見呢個新生嘅呢位嘅彌賽亞。
Now there are some stories that say the Magi came from China.
咁都有人話有啲嘅智者就係其中一個，其中有啲係從中國而嚟嘅。
Maybe Hong Kong.
當然係香港㗎啦。
The new wise men from Hong Kong.
新嘅智者就係從香港而嚟。
We started not in China. We started on the Iraq-Iran border.
咁我哋其實開始嘅時候喺伊拉克嘅邊境裏邊咧，展開呢一個智者嘅旅程。
And we had people walk and ride camels for 99 days from Iraq, Iran, all the way to Bethlehem to celebrate the birth of Christ.
嗱，所以當時就有人即係從騎駱駝，就由伊拉克、伊朗一直就去到伯利恆，就用咗99日嘅時間。
And they arrived on Christmas Day, the year 2000 in Bethlehem, in a very, very big celebration that we had.
咁所以2000年就終於抵達咗呢一個嘅即係聖地啦。所以當時就有一個好盛大嘅慶祝。
By that time, the whole peace process and the negotiations had collapsed.
但係嗰陣時候喺2000年嘅時候，整個嘅和談嘅進程就已經崩潰。
And we were in the beginning of what is known as the second intifada, the second uprising.
咁我哋要面對就有所謂喺巴勒斯坦人裏邊所講嘅咧，就有所謂第二次嘅起義，佢就用呢個字嚟做表達。
Which has been a very violent and deadly confrontation between the Palestinians and the Israelis.
咁於是呢一個嘅起義就其實係以巴兩個之間一個好嚴重嘅一個嘅衝突，軍事嘅衝突。
Many people have died.
好多人死咗。
Have suffered from this.
咁啊，雙方面都係為此嚟到係承受嗰個嘅苦難。
And as a Palestinian, I say this that it is wrong for anybody to say, but we killed more from them than they killed from us, or we did more violence to them, or they did more violence to us than what we did to them. Because at the end of the day, when you ask a Palestinian mother and an Israeli mother to describe the situation of the death of their children, they both cry the same tears.
嗱，我可以話即係其實最重要就唔係話邊一方即係殺得對方嘅人係更加多，或者邊一方係 嗰個責任係最大。咁其實最後嘅時候，一個以色列嘅母親同一個巴勒斯坦母親，佢哋流嘅眼淚基本上都係一樣。
So as an organization, we immediately took the role of what can we do with all of the suffering that is happening.
所以當時我哋可以做嘅就係點樣係減少雙方嘅人民佢哋喺呢方面嘅嗰個嘅痛苦。
And very briefly, before we take the break, to describe to you the work that we do as an organization.
咁喺小息之前，我再繼續去即係小息之後，我會講我嘅工作裏邊嘅情況。
Our name is Holy Land Trust.
我哋個機構嘅名就叫做聖地信託基金。
What we believe is where we live is the Holy Land.
就係話我哋所活我哋所做嘅都係同呢個聖地有關。
It is a sacred place where the prophets, where the Messiah, where God brought His message to humanity.
我哋就話呢個聖地就係話喺當中有先知，有呢個嘅彌賽亞，上帝又有唔同嘅方法喺當中係讓人去明白佢嘅信息。
The word trust does not mean fund because we don't have money.
嗱，其實呢個嘅信託都唔可以用信託呢個字，因為我哋其實冇乜錢嘅。
The word trust comes from giving somebody, entrusting somebody with something, a trusteeship.
嗱，所以其實如果翻譯嘅話，我就會話應該用信任會係更加嘅好，就用信任係代替咗信託，因為我哋唔係同錢有關嘅話，我哋點樣去建立雙方人民之間嗰個互信嘅關係。
So what we believe is that those who live in the Holy Land have been entrusted by God to take care of this land.
嗱，所以我話嗰啲住響聖地嘅人，佢哋已經係被上帝所信任，以致佢哋可以繼續喺呢個地土裏邊嚟到去過佢哋正常嘅生活。
To honor the land,
嚟到係要去尊重呢個嘅地土
honor the other communities that live in this land,
就尊重喺呢個地土裏邊生活同埋居住嘅嗰啲唔同嘅團體。
and through this, for all of us to become a symbol of what does it really mean to live in peace and justice and equality, an example for the world.
於是當佢哋係可以和平嚟到共處嘅時候，彼此之間嗰種嘅生活就可以向世界又成為咗示範，成為一個美好嘅見證。
So what we do is we look at the challenges that are facing the communities in the land itself, not the political issue, not what you take, what I take, but what are the challenges within each community that prevent them from recognizing and seeing the right of the other to live in equality and justice and peace.
嗱，所以對於我哋嚟講，最重要就唔係牽涉到政治嘅嗰個層面，而係話我哋作為一個生活喺一個共同社區裏邊嘅人士，我哋面對嘅乜嘢係共同嘅挑戰呢？以致我哋係一同嘅嚟到解決同埋處理我哋所要面對嘅嗰啲種種嘅挑戰。
And one of the challenges we work on is the fact that there is still a military occupation that controls me and my life as a Palestinian.
嗱，其中一個我哋要面對嘅就係呢個軍事嘅嗰個嘅管治，咁呢個就係影響住無論係我或者其他生活喺呢個地區裏邊嗰啲人民嘅嗰個正常嘅嗰個生活。
Even though I, as a person, have never committed an act of violence,
雖然我作為一個我係從來係冇做過任何暴力行動嘅人。
my freedom, my access to resources, my movement, my ability to go to Jerusalem and pray in church is completely limited and controlled.
但係我可以做嘅，即係無論我係要去耶路撒冷或者去其他地方裏邊去講學或者其他等等，其實某一個程度我嘅自由都係受到一啲若干程度嘅嗰個嘅限制。
Even basic things like my access to water, which is a source for life, is much more limited than the access of the Israeli to water.
嗱，比方我去講攞水呢件最普通嘅事情，我想講巴勒斯坦人去攞水係比一個猶太人去攞水喺現實生活嚟講係更加嘅困難。
So we don't look at the occupation as a political thing, we look at it as a human rights thing that has to end.
嗱，所以當我哋去睇呢個軍人嘅嗰個嘅管轄，我就會係去睇就唔係一個政治嘅層面，我哋去點樣去解決，而係作為一個人係牽涉一個人權嘅層面，我哋點樣嚟到去應對。
And The way we do this, our training program is through nonviolence. We teach people how to nonviolently stand up for their rights. Never ever to use violence.
嗱，於是喺我哋嗰啲訓練嘅課程裏邊，我哋去教導啲巴勒斯坦人，就係佢哋點樣去爭取佢哋嘅權益，但佢哋爭取係用一個非暴力嘅一個嘅手段嚟係達成嘅。
The second issue we work with is now on the Jewish community, the Jewish side.
第二方面我哋要做嘅就對嗰啲猶太人嘅群體。
And we ask what is missing, what is needed to happen within the Jewish community that they can begin to see our rights as Palestinians to live in the land as their equals.
嘗試從佢哋嘅眼光嚟到去睇，究竟有啲乜嘢呢啲以色列人可以做，以致讓呢啲巴勒斯坦人有翻佢哋應該有嘅嗰啲嘅權益。
And one thing that we started finding out more and more in our research.
咁喺我哋嘅研究裏邊，我哋揾到嘅時候。
And it came in a very important part in my life, in my own spiritual transition process.
咁就喺我個人喺我嘅屬靈嘅旅程裏邊，我自己嚟到係去經驗嘅。
When I, as a Christian, was challenged by understanding what it means to love the enemy.
咁其中一個就係話喺我嘅屬靈嘅旅程裏邊，我要學習嘅就乜嘢叫做愛我嘅仇敵。
Which, you know, it's in the Bible, love your enemy.
咁大家都會知道喺聖經嘅更新部分裏邊就有提到呢個愛你嘅仇敵。
And it's a commandment.
呢個就係一個嘅命令。
So we don't have an option on this one.
咁所以呢樣嘢嚟講係冇得選擇嘅。咁呢個就係我哋一定要去做嘅。
During that time, I was struggling with this question. Jewish friends of mine from America.
當時我就喺呢方面有一個好掙扎，就我有一個嘅朋友嚟自美國。
Called me up and they said, Sami, we want to invite you to come on a pilgrimage with us.
咁佢話 Sami， 我哋就想邀請你同我哋一齊去某個地方。
So imagine Jewish people from America calling a Christian in the Holy Land to go on pilgrimage with them.
咁其實呢個猶太人喺美國嘅，佢就嚟到叫一個喺巴勒斯坦基督徒，就大家一齊咧係有一個嘅旅程。
So I said, you know, where does the Jew go for a pilgrimage?
咁你話究竟猶太人做咩要去一個所謂朝聖之旅
And they said, we want you to go to Europe with us on pilgrimage.
咁其實佢哋嗰個朝聖之旅咧就唔係去聖地，而係去歐洲。
I live in the Holy Land. Everybody comes to the Holy Land for the pilgrimage. What is in Europe?
咁我喺聖地裏邊咧，當然啲人佢哋去朝聖咧，就係由歐洲、歐美唔同地方裏邊去到聖地啦。咁今次咧就調轉啦。
And the pilgrimage they took me on was a pilgrimage that completely transformed my life.
咁而佢哋邀請我呢一個所謂即係呢一個嘅旅程咧，就其實就改變咗我整個嘅生活。
I went with them to the death camps of Auschwitz and Birkenau in Poland, where the Holocaust happened.
咁大家都會明白啦。咁我就去咗波蘭呢一個奧斯威辛嘅集中營裏邊。當時奧斯威辛集中營裏邊咧死咗唔少嘅猶太人。咁我就去到嗰度係有一個嘅參觀。
Over there, I did not just see my enemy. I also saw what makes my enemy my enemy.
咁我去到嗰度唔單止係睇到我嘅敵人，我更加去了解有啲乜嘢嘅因素令到佢哋係成為我嘅敵人。
Where I began to understand that the reason why the Jewish community engages with me in this, not because they think a theology that says they are better than me or this is their land and not my land. They experience deep trauma and violence in their life where they feel they cannot trust anybody anymore because of the suffering they have.
嗱，於是我就開始明白呢啲嘅猶太人，佢哋喺以前納粹德國嘅時候，佢哋經驗一個好深刻嘅嗰個嘅災難同埋痛苦。以致呢個就構成咗猶太人喺裏邊一個好強烈嘅不安感。點解佢哋而家會做出呢啲種種嘅加害者嘅呢啲嘅行動
？And how the world has ignored this suffering and pain and trauma for the Jewish community.
喺以前嘅日子裏邊，世界其他嘅地區人佢哋就忽略咗，或者係冇理會到呢啲猶太人昔日所面對嘅嗰啲傷痛嘅經驗。
We think that by giving them financial support, by giving them political support, by giving them military support, they will take the guilt from us.
嗱，於是佢哋就有一個錯誤嘅諗法，以為喺西方嘅國家裏邊，我哋又俾猶太人有經濟、政治、軍事嘅支援，就可以解決咗，就可以稍為咧令到我哋自己裏邊嗰啲罪疚感咧係減輕咗。
But in reality, and this is, I don't say this as a Palestinian or a Christian, many of my Jewish friends say this, is that trauma still continues to lead us and we need healing from the trauma.
嗱，其實好多嗰啲我猶太嘅朋友今日都要同我講，其實嗰個嘅所謂傷痛之後帶嚟嘅後遺症，嗰個嘅仍然係深遠地影響住而家嘅嗰班嘅猶太人。
So a big part of our work now that we actually do with Israeli organizations, Palestinian organizations, is looking into healing of the traumas of all the communities of this land.
嗱，所以而家我要做嘅喺我嘅嗰個機構裏邊，同埋其他唔同嘅團體，又點樣去幫助呢啲嘅猶太人或者巴勒斯坦人去處理呢一個嘅創傷後遺症所帶嚟喺佢哋生命裏邊嗰個嘅影響。
And again, we do workshops and seminars and training and develop material for the 3 different religions of the land to engage in trauma healing for their own community.
於是我哋就喺3個唔同嘅村落裏邊就做呢啲咁嘅一啲醫治，幫助佢哋嚟到去處理呢啲傷痛所帶嚟嘅嗰個嘅情況。
The third work that we do, I will talk about after the break because it's the work that does with leadership.
咁第3樣我要做咧就係同領導有關，咁呢個咧我就會喺小息之後再同大家一齊嘅分享。
And I thank you for your listening.
好，多謝大家好用心。